Hi guys, Dr. Connor Brady here, author of Feeding Dogs. Oh, no way, there. So in this video we're going to be talking about what the diet studies say, what's the dog physiologically geared up to eat, and some of the evidence, some of the studies behind that. You would think that this question would be put to bed ages ago and we would just make food that suits the animal, as you would, every animal in the zoo. Somebody comes in, what does this animal need? Oh, he's an omnivore. Okay, can I have a bit more information than that? Like, does he eat fruit, vegetables, meat? When does he eat these? How much of what? What sort of animals? Where did he grow up? In Africa? Do they have this sort of meat in Africa? On and on and on. So, just saying carnivore or omnivore is just ridiculous. You've anteaters are carnivores, and, you don't give him beefsteak. So, it's not as simple as just getting those simple definitions, as much as they like to think that, oh, well, here's an example of a dog eating a carrot, therefore we feed him 60% cereal, science. So it takes a little bit of work. So if you're a zoologist, you've got a few tools to hand to how you would examine to see what an animal would normally be fed in the zoo, for example. And the three things will be evolution, ancestry, where did he come from? And the dog came from a long line of wolves. All wolves are carnivores, and then dogs popped up 30,000 years ago or so, depending on your what way you're looking at the fossil record. But 30,000 years ago, let's say, it's the best we can come up with at the moment, and these little proto-dogs popped up. And we know from studies of the dingo, which is a domestic dog only 4,000 years ago, we're way better than talking about wolves. Forget talking about wolves, okay? Dogs aren't wolves. Wolf food and pictures of wolves everywhere. Just stop talking about wolves, because they always say the dog's not a wolf, actually. And you go, okay, yeah, because they're so far removed from wolves, they barely interbreed with each other. But I tell you, one animal they're very close is the dingo. And they are interbreeding with dingoes because dingoes were domestic dogs only 4,000 years ago. In fact, look up singing dog, Papua New Guinea singing dog. I've never heard of that breed before, but it's a dog, domestic type dog. And it is identical to a dingo, so it's quite clear which way the dogs came down from China, down through to Papua New Guinea eventually, and crossed over to Australia. Anyway, but 4,000 years ago, dingoes were domestic dogs. Very close. They look identical to dogs. Far more so than African wild dogs, which are a very long time removed from domestic dogs. What African wild dogs eat is of no relevance to domestic dogs. Millions of years they've been separated, whereas here's a domestic dog, or a dingo 4,000 years ago. Look, the point is, dingo, ultra carnivorous, 97% plant matter. So when you look at all the diet studies of dingoes, and we've got lots of different diet studies, most of them peppered with dingo hybrid domestic dogs, and in fact a lot of domestic dogs as well, because they shoot them in the outback. We find that these animals are very carnivorous, 3% plant matter, and that usually comes from the dogs living in the tropics that are eating small birds where they can't shake free the stomach contents, so they just eat the whole lot. Too much effort. You'll see a dog might eat the intestines of a rabbit, but rarely would he eat the actual stomach of a rabbit. So it's too much half-digested grass in there. It's not stuff that the dog really wants to eat. And any animals above that, the dog does not eat the stomach contents. These ideas of, oh, the wolf eats the stomach contents first. Yeah, show me a picture of that happening. Show me one video of that, because Mech, who has just thousands and thousands of hours of videos eating it, says twice the stomach contents are of no interest to the wolves. They want the meat in the bone. So that's the kind of evolution ancestry bit. The diet studies are as confused really for people. I love diet studies. That's my background. That's what my doctorate was looking at. The effect of nutrition via diet studies on the digestive kind of morphology of mammals, of group living mammals. I use deer as my test subject and on from there. So the diet studies are great because they can be so confusing. It really matters which way you collect the data. First of all, if you're looking through a telescope from a mile away, you don't know if a fox in a carrot patch is eating the carrots or the slugs off the carrots. So it's not a very good quantitative way of finding out what's going on. Better you get a sample from the wolf. So you have two options now. Either you collect a stool sample, which is pretty good. It tells you what the wolf ate, but it doesn't give you a good idea of proportion, because if you eat chicken breast, very little of it comes out in your poo, but if you eat cabbage, a lot of that undigested plant fibre comes out in your poo. So plant material will be overrepresented in a stool sample if you wanted to know how much of which to feed them, for example. So that's one little issue. Also, you can confuse stool samples. Geneticists hate when feral dogs are around wolf populations, because their poo samples are almost genetically identical. They can't tell the two of them apart. Hint about their diets. But the best studies are of dogs where you take a sample from their stomach, which usually involves sacrificing the animal. So these studies come from poor areas where there's lax roaming laws, usually village dump dogs. And these dogs go out and scavenge during the day, and at night time they come back to their poor families who who look after them, poorer families. The only reason I say that is because poorer families do not waste meat protein on their dogs. Believe me, they feed them plant material, which all the studies would say vegetable leftovers, sadsa, porridge, all that kind of stuff is fed to the dogs, and then off the dogs go to top up their failing protein reserves by being ultra carnivorous. So that is one type of diet study. Another way to study dogs ideally would be truly feral dogs that have never been touched by humans. Wouldn't that make more sense? It happens that the studies of truly feral dogs show the dogs are very carnivorous. It's when you start looking at the village dogs that go home to their families that they're eating far more vegetable material. And then, baddies can hold up these studies of, in India particularly, there's 40-50% plant material in this dog. Therefore, that's why we've always been feeding them wheat and corn, So it's just, that's just utter nonsense. This is a dog that's been fed plant material by its parents. And when you feed a pup that young in life, in fact, you can spray apple in the air of a pregnant bitch and the pups will come out fighting over the apple-tainted nipples. Can you believe that? That's how sensitive it is. You come out geared up, I eat this stuff, I eat this sort of proteins. And by the time the imprinting period is finished for all the behaviour nerds out there, whatever, 4 or 5 months, whatever, it's probably moved on from when I was taught it in guide dogs. But by 5-6 months of age, things are kind of set. These are things I like, these are things that kind of make me afraid, these are foods I like, these are foods I don't eat. So that's why when you introduce, say, raw to a cat later on in life, they look at it and go, don't want that. And it's like, but you're a carnivore. No, I'm not. No, I'm a kibblivore. And that's what I want. Lots of salt and taste enhancers. And getting a cat off that can be quite difficult. 30-60 days, in fact. So some transitions of just tiny bit more raw each time, or just move them onto cooked tuna first and then slowly onto raw tuna, whatever. Dogs, much easier. It's just like, oh, okay, I'll eat that. Most dogs anyway. Some dogs can be a bit picky, but we get them over that. Different video, Connor. So that's the diet studies. We know the dogs are very much meat eatery. And physiologically, sorry, my shirt there. So it's too hot to button it up anymore, guys. I'm very sorry about that. This is the way it has to be. Physiologically, the dog, when you look inside him, from a biology point of view, the dog is all meat eater. Everything about the dog is meat eater. He's got a jaw that only snaps open and closed. It doesn't move side to side like us, true omnivores. We eat plant materials. We've got flat teeth and we grind the forage down so we can swallow it and eat it and feed it to our bacteria. Dogs don't eat plant material, so they get a bite the animal like that, then they get a hold of a piece of flesh and then they shake their head and they rip off a piece because they have no chewing action to do it themselves, and then they chomp it down with these massive incisors that come down past each other like a side, the back teeth. That's called a carnasal tooth. That's how you know he eats meat on the bone. And he's got an extra wide keratinized gullet for swallowing big lumps of food quickly. Jagged teeth. Does that look like a face of a plant eater to you? Look, on and on and on. He's got taste receptors adapted to meat, and they'll set his olfaction. Everything is forward-facing eyes. This guy means business. So that's just the head. We haven't even started on digestive physiology. Short, fast, very acidic digestive system that is not conducive with digestion of plant material. Smooth intestines, food shoots straight through. No cecum, no convolutions to slow down the plant material, to give the bacteria time to eat the plant forage. In a dog system, the bacteria is like, I wanted a bit of that. Okay, so in a omnivore and particularly herbivore, the forage moves much slower, so the bacteria has time, and there's lots of dead ends in your digestive system that the dog or that the bacteria can do their bits anyway. So look, lots of things, but at the kind of molecular level, there has been a few interesting little changes in the dog. So we would say that the dog is running thousands of carnivorous processes a minute, is happy to live in a state of keto, which if people are into keto, there you go. If you're not, doesn't matter. Okay, they just like living in with no carbohydrates. They'll live in protein and fat all day long. It's perfectly good. Cats are almost in that state perpetually, better off in that state. Trout, owls, dolphins, name your carnivore, they're in a state of keto because that's the way you eat protein and fat and shun the carbs. It turns out that dogs, while happily in a state of keto all the time, can be fed a little bit of carbohydrates. Not that they can be, but they have been fed a little bit of carbohydrates. The reason we know this is because at the molecular level, at the genetic level, many breeds have replicated a gene called AME2B. So AME is short for amylase, so that's the enzyme for digesting carbohydrates. And the dog wouldn't have replicated this more. And like some dogs have 4 copies or 6 or 8 copies more. Other breeds have up to 32 copies more. Okay, so they've got lots more copies of this AME2B gene. Now, these are studies of dry-fed dogs. We don't have studies of raw-fed dogs. So it will be very interesting to see how quick that regresses, you know, when you're not being fed all this ridiculous carbohydrates. So that's one thing that the study hasn't dealt with, but I'm sure that study will come soon. But the fact remains, dogs have taken these small evolutionary steps. I mean, Darwin would have given his to have seen this. This is an incredible tiny little step, and then the dry food companies leap on it and go, haha, this is why we've been introducing high dose carbohydrates since the 1950s after the war, not to make money and make some crap food product. Of course, we knew that this study was coming up in 65 years, so that's why we've been doing it. You know, utter nonsense. It's a bit like, as Doug Newman said to Gene Dodds, you know, just because I can digest ethanol and sucrose doesn't mean half my diet should be rum and cookies, does it? So it's a great response, isn't it? I wish I came up with that. That's the kind of carbohydrate thing. Dogs have some dogs. The dogs that evolved beside farmers, you know, the wheat and corn. Sorry, I'm sure. Beside the wheat and corn growers of the world, have replicated out a bit of this gene, but it's interesting that the likes of Akitas and Huskies haven't. Okay, not much at all. 4, maybe probably the same as a dingo, or no, actually not even a dingo, probably a little bit more than that. So they just don't eat a whole lot of cereal up in those parts, you know. So they didn't replicate out the gene. So it's a little step of a little tweak, a little nod towards evolution in a product that's processing thousands of carnivorous things every minute. You've happened to ignore this. But there's other things. They've got hepatic glucanase. Dogs have. Cats don't have that. Trout don't have it. You know, carnivorous fish and everything, carnivorous birds, crocs, they don't have hepatic glucanase, but dogs do. So tiny steps, and then there's other little things that, you know, birds get too hard to pronounce. A couple of little enzymatic steps, 1 or 2 things that show this is an animal that possibly has taken some steps towards carbohydrate digestion. Tiny steps, nothing major at the structural level, as I just went through, you know, just tiny little. So that's very interesting. That's what the science says. It's not a reason to feed massive dose carbohydrates to your dog. Certainly not dextrinized, which is cooked up, ready to be digested wheat and corn. That is high carbohydrate, rapidly digested carbohydrates, which to the body is sugar. It's only one tiny little digestive step in a flash. It is sugar, and sugar in the blood is poisonous. That's when all the insulin comes in to pack it into your fat stores, obesity crisis, and cancer as well. Okay, so any sort of cancer in the body, it needs insulin. Cancer has huge amounts of insulin receptors on the outside of it. That's how we find cancer in the body. We radioactive tag some Fanta or Lucozade and make the patient drink it. It's called a PET scan. And is it called a PET scan? I hope it is. And anyway, the body drinks it, the patient drinks it, and they scan it, and they can see where the sugar went, and the tumours light up like little Christmas trees, because that's what they need to grow. They need insulin, which is a growth hormone. It's an anabolic hormone. So without getting into it, it's not, you can't feed huge amounts of carbohydrates and think, oh well, it'll be fine as long as he gets his minimum amount of protein and the minimum amount of fat from a rendering plant in a land far away. That's okay. It's not okay. You can't just sell really dirt poor breakfast cereal, some multicolored high carb, high sugar breakfast cereal to a kid, but now with vitamin D and iron for your kid's health, you know, but you just put it on top of a big pile of shit, you know. So it's this ridiculous nutritional nonsense that they came up with in human sectors, and they just ply it with vigor in the veterinary industry because there's just little to no regulation. They regulate them, the pet industry regulates themselves, and the vet industry doesn't seem to have any questions. So it's a little bit of a problem that we have. So I would say that any scientist from the outside looking in is saying that this animal is very much a meat eater. There's very little to say he eats a whole lot of plant material. I use a bit of plant material. I'm a vegetarian, believe it or not. So I do recommend a tiny bit of plant material, and I scrape my plates into the dog's bowl and everything else. You know, I don't worry about the little bits and pieces. There's just so much good in plant material. There's ridiculous phytonutrients, and if you look at the anti-inflammatories, antioxidants in seaweed alone, I mean, you know, medicinal herbs, Jesus, a bit of carrot, who cares, whatever, you know, that's all fine. Dark greens, I like a bit of dark greens because I think, well, all herbivores are eating that, so a little bit of that in the dog's food would be great, because I can't trust the meat that I'm feeding is going to have all these bioactive compounds from the plants. So the dream is that the herbivore eats all these plant material that we want for ourselves, and then the carnivore eats the herbivore and gets those nutrients. But unfortunately, our meat chain doesn't work like that anymore. We're not shooting deer off the sides of mountains. We're eating these intensively reared chickens and and cows, which pale in significance to the wild fellas, you know, some even organic to intensively reared. So I do believe you add in your own little bits and pieces is a really good idea. It's just to be aware of that AME2B gene thing that pops up now and again. It's just a nonsense that dry food companies use to lead you astray. This is very much a meat eater. That is what the diet studies say, and that's what the biology says, and sure, that's what you should feed them. Meat, bit of bone, bit of organ, maybe a bit of plant material, whatever you like. Don't overthink it.